Hello and welcome to episode number 7 of the Mongoose podcast. I am your host, Fritz Imperial, and today I'm joined by Endeavor. He is a YouTuber from Canada, and he's been talking a lot on his channel, or he's recently started his channel, and he's been talking about culture. And thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me, Fritz.
Yep. I know, we've been talking a lot on Discord, but when you started your channel, I was actually very much impressed by, if you'll allow me to sing your praises for a moment, but your video on Prager University called was it like the Boomer's Blue Pill?
The
Or
baby boomer blue pill.
yeah, and basically just sort of not reacting to a specific video by Prager University, but sort of just the conservative mindset that they're presenting. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. And it's you said something that I think I've been searching for proper words to describe, but my issue with the conservative movement and broadly why I would not call myself a conservative is there is like what's important, what seems to be important to Dennis Prager, Steven Crowder, and Ben Shapiro is maybe some cultural things like abortion, which we agree on, but they seem to be much more interested in preserving the American neoliberal project and free markets, where you said, the real problem we see as happening in the West is the destruction of our culture and heritage. Like you have this just amazing photo, and you said it's from a city you live near, Toronto. Sorry, I don't want to dox you, but of like this old building that has like this new renovation, quote unquote, coming out of it that just looks like this horribly ugly glass crystalline structure coming out.
Yes, that's actually the museum in my city in Toronto. I live near there. And yeah, I mean, it was just so symbolic of just how the iconoclasm against traditional Western culture, because it's literally a modernist or postmodernist building just cutting into this early 20th century museum, and it's really quite symbolic.
And it almost just looks like a tumor, just like I keep using the word crystal, but it just looks like that. Like it's going to continue growing more and more until it destroys all of it. And like if I was ever on Steven Crowder's show or like interviewed or in a conversation with a normal conservative, I would just simply flat out ask them, what social or cultural aspect have conservatives, can you name one single conservative achievement on social issues in the past 60 years? Can you give me one?
Exactly.
Yeah, they have completely failed to stop the sexual revolution, abortion, gay marriage, the secularization of Western culture. Like, and I think I recently tweeted out to Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder that, like, I consider a rather bold statement that a single great conservative artist or poet would have been more useful to the conservative movement than Reagan ever could be.
I totally agree, because I think it was you that said before that while the conservatives in the 80s were trying to get Reagan elected, the left was training film students. They were training all these professionals who were creating culture, and once that came into fruition, the right had lost that culture war. It was over before it started.
People especially like misattribute, or they try and attribute that Reagan somehow issued in this sort of conservative like era in the 1980s. And I think to an extent maybe he woke up a number of sort of conservatives that were there reacting to some of the radical or flow in the 70s, which sort of, it seems like in the 80s the progressives took a bit of a backseat and just worked on consolidating the institutions rather than being the sort of second wave feminists in the 1970s. But like I think it was sort of more ultimately a farce in the sense that the silent majority, the moral majority of Americans that existed in the 50s, it just continued to decline and decline. And I think up until now, I mean, huge number, if you actually look at the statistics for, let's take white evangelical Christians who voted for Donald Trump, if we're going to compare Trump to Reagan, is that, if you look at the statistics, and I was one of those white evangelicals that voted for Trump, about half of them did not vote for him, but they voted against Hillary Clinton. And the fact is that they are so worried about Hillary Clinton and Democrats and the progressives and progressive candidates explicitly saying, we want to get rid of your religious freedom. That's a real problem. Even if you win on that, the fact that that's now an issue shows how far the Overton window has shifted.
Yeah, exactly. And to the 1980s, it was just it slowed down the progressive tide slightly by a decade. It didn't in any way conserve anything, and certainly didn't push it back.
And I think that's the thing is if conservatives are like, well, we're just trying to hold back the progressives. Well, the thing is, progressives are going to win. Then you're admitting the progressives are going to win eventually. We're going to get what the progressives are going to get what they want, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah, and you'll notice that conservatives of today, they're holding on to things that the progressives have already achieved. So, like what I tried to say in the PragerU video was how they're like, "Oh yeah, second wave feminism was amazing, but now it's enough is enough." You know, they didn't really question the underlying belief of egalitarianism.
And I think some of them are. I don't know if this is necessarily the point, but this is just sort of a theory or a thought I might be tossing out. Is perhaps one of the reasons is that, as I've found, sort of going into more of the reactionary ideas is when you start getting deeper and deeper into it, you ultimately start rejecting a lot of the core principles of the American founding fathers. You start sort of questioning ideas of like the old school classical liberalism. And I think that's a project that modern conservatives just seem completely unwilling to ever question.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do with my with the last few videos I've made is trying to really understand the underlying beliefs held in Western contemporary Western society and why it seems to be pushing society to the left. And I think a lot of them are just liberal egalitarianism, and you know, a lot of times they'll talk about they'll say the regressive left or SJWs or whatever they talk about today. And you can, I think of it really as kind of the fulfillment of liberal egalitarianism, because they're really just taking these ideas to the absolute extreme.
Or in the way, I think conservatives, their mistake is the fact that they are trying to uphold a culture that cannot be sustained anymore because of the fact that culture, American society, American culture, and Western culture in general has been de-Christianized and liberalized so much that you can't get, the small town 1950s America anymore, because you just can't do that in an era in which, let's face it, probably more than half the population aren't really all that religious.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the answer is to have a cultural movement of our own.
Mm-hmm. And I think the problem is that what absolutely needs to be laid out first and foremost is this cannot be a political cultural movement in the sense of what we have to avoid is being Dinesh D'Souza or Pureflix, which is we can't just be making flat out propaganda.
Yes,
like
exactly.
That's not how we need, more. We need things like Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, not God's Not Dead 2.
Yeah, I think that one of the real problems is that the reason that a lot of the baby boomer conservative entertainment and a lot of their talking points come across as disingenuous, I think, is because they actually accept a lot of the left's premises to be true, and they're really kind of just trying to restructure the goalposts in a way that looks favorable to them, which is why. It's like the Democrats are the real racists, the fascists were leftists, these kind of.
And I think, like, just on that point, is I love there's a little comic strip where it's on one panel, it's a Republican elephant going, "The Democrats are the real racists," and it shows like 20 years later, like they're dressed in like the weird, like, blue hair and problem glasses, and they're saying like the neo-Leninists are the real transphobes.
Yeah, because I mean, at this rate, that's what they're going to be saying in 20 years.
Because, like, and even going on to PragerU, I think one of their worst offenses recently is something Ben McLean made an excellent video on, where there's a guy by the name of Guy Benson, who's a homosexual, quote unquote, Christian conservative. And like, I love how just for like 15 minutes, Ben just completely tears apart how that's completely inconsistent. But it's like, that's the new face of conservatism, where it's just how moderate can we be on economic policy, because the idea that like, oh, we're going to stand for traditional marriage, and that's sort of gone. And I think pretty soon, or what I would hope would happen is, if that is indeed the case, conservative evangelicals and Catholics need to really start either pushing hard against that in the conservative movement, or start abandoning it for something a little more radical. Because if in 10 to 15 years the conservative movement is going to be have no interest in traditional marriage, which, considering the fact that they already accept no-fault divorce and birth control, is already more or less the case. But once they start, Endeavor has left the podcast. Oh dear. I guess I'll wait for him to come back. Chat, if you have any questions, just type it in the chat, and I'll see if I can answer them. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, good. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, my bad.
That's fine.
Yeah, with the Guy Benson video, I mean, it's their way of saying that it's their way of trying to prove to progressives that they're not bigots. Which it's a lot like the Candace Owens debacle with like Paul Joseph Watson basically defending her launching a doxing server because he wanted to, because it's his way of saying, oh look, she's a conservative black woman, I'm not a racist. The problem is that you're trying to justify yourself to progressives on their terms, and by doing that you're accepting their rules, and they're going to beat you at that game.
It's a very bad game. I mean, if conservatives could figure out a way to, somehow convince African Americans to stop voting Democrat, that'd be wonderful. But it just doesn't seem to be happening, which is why, I'm entertained by Kanye West saying these very absurd and ridiculous tweets, but conservatives saying, "Hey, look, now he's base. Look at this base Kanye West, who's frankly a degenerate." I mean, I don't like him one bit in terms of the actual culture he's producing, but it's it doesn't matter how it's the same thing with Milo, right? Where it's Milo can be as promiscuous and out of control as he wants. I mean, to an extent, certainly with what happened to him last year, but it's hey, look, he says I want free markets and small government, therefore everybody's let in, and it's ultimately at the expense of actual traditionalist conservatives or social conservatives and Christians. Oh, hold on. I have a super chat from California Reactionary. Thank you very much for $5. Do you think demographic shifts are the most important factor in future elections? I think yes. The only problem is that I think at this point, elections are not as important as conservatives have been making them out to be for the past several decades.
Yeah. I would agree with that, because I think that the things that we want to achieve, I don't think we'll be able to do it through elections. Oh, actually, I know we won't be able to do it through elections because you can't. Well, you haven't, and because also you can't. Someone's not going to vote for something that a premise that they haven't accepted. So I think it has to be a cultural change first.
And that's why I think, again, if in 1979, had conservatives, instead of funding the Reagan campaign, had they been saying, hey, what if we took all the millions and billions of dollars that we spend on all these political campaigns and start saying, hey, what if we just instead start funding a conservative film school or an art school that's sort of run by conservative Christians, or give lots of money towards, Christian schools? That would have been a lot better.
Oh yeah, definitely, because yeah, a lot of cultural works, because I mean, you look at Hollywood today, it's dominated by progressives and
apparently, rapists and pedophiles.
Oh yeah, well, that's actually not that's not really surprising given the culture and the kind of messages that they give off. And what I will say is that I feel that especially in the last 3-4 years, people have become very disillusioned with mainstream progressive culture and the entertainment that it's outputting.
I mean, I think go ahead.
Yep. Oh no, I think there's a real opportunity for alternative entertainment, and one that can have a that we can have a reactionary bent to it and push culture.
I mean, especially now, because I think with Bill Nye and Steven Universe and a lot of these sort of progressive dominated series and piece of entertainment, they're sort of becoming they're now becoming the sort of pure flicks and just straight propaganda, where just the Bill Nye thing of just, this is the sexual revolution all outright, and everybody's like, that's disgusting. Or I think Distributus described it as Steven Universe is so bad because its main character is so just completely totally emasculated that he just becomes completely annoying.
Well, yes. I actually had this interesting conversation with this one guy. And what he said to me was that when he was in university, he thought Barack Obama was cool, but he never in a million years ever would have thought that this Bill Nye or these pink pussy hats or the progressive entertainment being put out today, he never would have thought any of this was cool. And I think that's a real opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing is you're starting to see some of it, or something sort of along the lines of Sam Hyde. Like, obviously, I know he's like a living meme, but it's almost sort of that's the point. Or you need, I think what conservatives need, or reactionaries at this point need, is we need a Milo Yiannopoulos that's actually morally sound. It'd be awesome to just have somebody that is like pushing the boundaries of culture. That's sort of like, that is what Milo Yiannopoulos sort of wish he was, where being sort of outrageous and insulting all the right people, but ultimately being a reactionary. So like not saying like, yes, I'm a Catholic, but I just got gay married. It's like, no.
Well, so okay, when you say we need a Milo Yiannopoulos, you mean as in someone that's outspoken and will go out there and be controversial? Because I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if I agree to an entire extent, because what I think we really need to not be so obvious about it. I guess, because I feel I feel like Milo, he had a shtick that that was entertaining for a few years, but I think it kind of just died off because he wasn't funny anymore.
And yeah, I mean, I suppose that, and I think that's why I mentioned Sam Hyde, where it's like Sam Hyde certainly is definitely some form of right wing, but like he sort of hides it by being this incredibly funny, but he's like not that outspoken about, like, he's just sort of this weirdo performance artist that just happens to look like every school shooter stereotype.
Well, but what I'll say is, I think, I mean, obviously he's a lot more moderate than us, but I think Jordan Peterson would be a good example.
Another super chat from California Reactionary. It's elections destroyed California, they still matter. I mean, I guess when it comes to immigration policy, I'm not saying that politics doesn't completely matter, but having an emphasis on both culture and politics, the problem is that whilst the progressives have done that, the conservatives have only done politics, it seems. Or when they have done culture, it's only been in the service of politics.
Yeah.
But I think moving on to just like actually trying to create new culture is, I think, something that is the Distributist, or I think a lot of people in our little, I suppose, traditionalist community would love, is like some sort of basis of a community of people that not just like commenting on politics or the news, but people that are actual cultural creators, like artists, musicians, writers, poets, that sort of thing. But people, because there are definitely people out there that have talent in those areas that are conservative, Christian reactionaries, but I think a lot of them are very isolated. And so if there's a way for them to get money and like a way for them to find a community so they can get their work out more, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah. What I say is that what people should do, people who are disenfranchised with mainstream entertainment and mainstream culture, is value that that really interests you. So even if it's something really specific, so I like in your case maybe Prussia. I know that you're really fascinated with Prussia.
That's a matter of history, but go on.
Well, so what I would say is like find either a historical period, or kind of philosophy, maybe a kind of art, maybe some literature, or something that interests you, and just get really get good at it. Learn a lot about it. Read about it, and yeah, I'd say that's one way of kind of breaking away from progressive dominated.
And I think and one way that certainly that helps address the whole LARP issue, where it's like, because what I've been trying to do is like, I'm not just, I don't want to just like LARP as, hey, I like Prussia, got Matoons, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I've actually like read numerous like books. I have lots of biographies of like the Prussian kings, of the Kaiser, of like the history of Prussia. And like, I actually went to school for 4 years to study European history. It's like, I like to think I have some sort of credentials where I'm not just LARPing or, you know, and I think it's
would you, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. But I was going to ask, would you say that studying Prussia was what made you a reactionary?
It was a number of things. Like, I've always sort of been on the right. I was, of course, my parents are normal Republican conservatives, but like, I started breaking away from them around college, and I started looking at different ideas, and just Prussia helped in the sense of it made me see that there was alternative viewpoints in the world outside of just the bog standard English American classical liberalism. That actually, no, there were other countries in the West that were Christian, that were Protestant when I was still a Protestant, that had an alternative ideology than classical liberalism, and that in some ways maybe they, had they survived into the 21st century, they wouldn't have devolved into so many of the problems that Britain and America face today, where the entire liberal culture that was built up has been completely eroded.
Yes. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at when I say like find something that really interests you, and something of value. So like I said, something that you can learn about the world from. And because for me, what I'd say really pushed me to my current political persuasion was my love of history, and just reading all these amazing stories, and of the British Empire, of all these amazing things, and knowing that the modern world really had no way of providing anything of comparison. Like I could never be as proud of the civilization I live in as the Victorians were of theirs, for example.
But which is, again, the sort of very bittersweet thing that we live in, where, if we still had a traditionalist culture with the technology and resources of now, like, I'm just imagining, like, how many enormous, beautiful cathedrals could we have been building the past 50 years, like amazing works of art, like the level of technology and access to resources where you can literally have, with computers, you can make any color you could possibly imagine on the visible light spectrum. And this should be a golden age for art and creativity, but like all we're getting is either, on the one hand, hyper romantic escapist stuff that doesn't that doesn't have anything to do with the real world, or these just disgusting bloody tampons that are also don't have anything to do with the real world, or unfortunately maybe have too much to do with the real world.
Yeah, I actually had made a short video comparing architecture in downtown Toronto, and a building I pointed out was it was a bank that was built in the 19th century, and what I pointed out was that the guy that made it, his name was John George Howard. What I had said was that he didn't have electricity, he didn't have a computer, he didn't have a calculator, but he built a building thousands of times more beautiful than any modern than modern architects can, because he had inspiration. He actually felt like he was building a part of something more important.
And again, I was thinking about that. I completely agree. As you think about, let's take like Leo Tolstoy, right? Where, okay, he wouldn't be able to like sit in his nice little air conditioned bedroom on his laptop with autocorrect on Microsoft Word. He would have had had to deal with all the health risks that would have existed in the mid 19th century, and would have okay, I can only write during the day or by candlelight, dim candlelight at night. And I have my little ink quill and my pieces of parchment, and I can't really make any mistakes, or I have to start over.
Yeah, it's all about inspiration.
And I think it's certainly, I imagine getting over that adversity helped, but it's also the fact that what we've lost, I think the chief reason why culture has degraded so much in the modern world is the fact that we've completely agreed with, I think this is one of the worst statements ever made, is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, in the sense that all art is subjective. Now, certainly art is in a lot of ways subjective. You can interpret different things from different works of art, but the problem is when you reject the idea that there is any objective, rational way that can be described as beauty.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you had said about a lot of art these days is just escapism, and I think it was you that had said before that the reason people want so much escapism is because they really are sick of life in the modern world. It's not really exciting. That's why they want to see escape.
The problem, the thing is, like, the modern world, it just can't offer people some, a level of satisfaction, and it's the way that, I think both of us are Christians, right? Like,
yes,
I think for us, like, we understand, or we believe, like, the ultimate answer of, like, filling that deep void that every human has in their, deep subconscious. Christianity or God is the thing that can ultimately, is the only thing that can fully fill that. And the thing is, so many people are without that, and they're trying everything they possibly can to fill that void through sex, drugs, and any form of cheap entertainment, to the point where, like, again, Distribute's pointed this out on his first episode of Nerd Culture, but from one of my favorite YouTube channels, Red Letter Media, where they have their, like, satirical nerd podcast, where one of the characters, like, says, like, like, they're making fun of, like, Loot Crate, and, like, he's like, so now every month I can get a few consumer products that will fill the void in my soul for a few minutes. And it's like, that's one of the things I think Distributors was completely right on. I know I have to mention him every stream, it seems, but he is right that one thing that nerd culture, or a new emerging culture, is going to need to address is it needs to be something that's not just consumption and buying things.
Yeah, and what I would say is that a lot of the major blockbuster films these days, a real problem is that money's really overtaken the art, and I know they've always been about money first and foremost. So that's not. I mean, I'm not upset about that. But the thing is that it makes a lot more. If a studio is going to spend like $250 million on a film, it makes a lot more sense to make Avengers, Guardians of Ultron, Age of Infinity 3,
Star Wars.
Yeah, it makes a lot because and just have this bland storylines, this a generic villain, portal in the sky or something like that. It makes a lot more sense financially because they know people are going to watch it. It's no risks are taken, and I really feel that both that and just how heavy-handedly they're just pushing progressive dogma today. I think that's really kind of what's opening a void, and I feel like people that counter progressive culture can fill that void. And
I think in a way it's like a new alternative culture, or like an alternative pop culture. It'd be, in a way, it's like, if it's something that people can participate in more than just, I'm a consumer of this corporate product, the better. Like, again, I want to start doing game reviews, because I think video games, a lot of us have sort of bashed them a little more than I think is what would it be, like a necessary, more than fair, in the sense that, because the thing is with video games, well, what's the big draw? Well, you are participating in them. Like, yes, you are buying a product, but you're actually doing something. You're not passively just watching it. You're playing a game. And in many ways, like, with multiplayer and mods, you're actively participating in it. And like, and like in terms of like game reviews, is two of my favorite channels on YouTube are called Joseph Anderson and Matthew Matosis, where they do incredibly in-depth, I would almost call it just like high, like, like respected, at the level of like respected film critics, game reviews. Like, one of them has like a 4-hour long review of all the Uncharted games and The Last of Us, or like a 6-hour long commentary through all of Dark Souls, where it's like just going in depth, looking at it as a work of art. And I think that's a much better direction of going. We're taking it seriously and looking at it not just as a corporate product, but sort of forcing us to look at it, as it, not the sort of perfect prepackaged corporate product, but a corporate product that's also a work of art that can be critiqued.
Yes, I would say that possibly in indie games there could be some potential for that. I mean, I'm not a game developer, so I mean, I wouldn't be the one to talk to. But
Like
oh, yeah, sorry, yes.
no, go ahead.
Oh, what I was gonna say though is, yeah, I think the problem is that a lot of games really focus on repetition. So a lot of these big multiplayer games, say Call of Duty, I mean, it's really just I mean, you're not really gaining anything out of playing it other than just like a huge time killer. But I think that there is potential if a game could actually try to be a work of art. I mean, that is a lot easier said than done, though, of course.
I mean, and that's why it's like, again, I'm so sorry. I really wish I could do this, but it's simply the fact that I can't record the game at a level of, my processing power of my computer is not to the point where I could reliably, or I could make a video of high enough quality that I would feel good releasing. But I feel like one of the games that has come close came out last year, Nier Automata. It's a Japanese game. And the story in that game, I think, is absolutely fantastic. And I even looked at it to the point where it almost, in some ways, philosophically addresses a lot of the core issues of the modern world, where, the idea of relativism and existentialism. Like, I don't want to spoil anything for people that would want to play it, but it's like the game essentially starts out with your first playthrough giving you a sort of normal, like sort of anime bog standard cathartic ending, and then you like play through the game a couple more times as different characters, or like you continue the story, and the game just sort of gives you like gut punch after gut punch, stripping away all of like what you thought had like true meaning, to the point where like it almost like it gets to almost the point where it's like it's going to go the route of, well, life is completely meaningless, there's no purpose in life. But it ends ultimately with an incredibly, beautiful and happy cathartic ending with, interestingly enough, essentially a resurrection with not just tacked on Christian themes. I think that there's definitely Christian themes in there that are a little more than what people would expect out of like anime or a Japanese game. Like there is actual care put into it.
Yeah. What I think is what we really need to focus on is having entertainment that you can take value away from. So, I mean, it could be in a video game, but I mean, what do you gain from playing the video game? So, do you gain like a message that's helpful to you by playing this game? Because, I mean, a lot of games that's clearly not the case. But when I talk about like trying to find things that interest you, so if you were really interested in, say, philosophy or history or art, just like getting to know these things and researching them a lot, it helps you out as a person, because I'd like to have entertainment that's not just pure consumption like we have in the modern world.
Yeah, and I feel like that game, Nier Automata, if you are interested, first off, the game is beautiful in terms of its art style and also its music. But also, I think I would even recommend it to people that think, want something with a deeper story that has that does actually delve a bit into philosophy. And it's not just what people, it's like, again, you could almost take away from when you first look at the game, you're like, what is Fritz talking about? It's like, no, trust me, it gets deep. And I think in a way, it's like, when I talk about anime, and I know everybody makes fun of me for being a weeb, but I don't really care, is like, it's not so much the fact that I think anime is going to like save Western culture. I think it's, first off, I believe a lot of it is, there's a reason why a lot of young Westerners are attracted to it, as opposed to a lot of this like, live action or animated stuff in the West. I think partially it's because it's sort of like, yes, it is hyper romantic, but in a way it's like people will choose that over something like Family Guy or South Park, where it's sort of like pure cynicism, pure salt, pure just like, oh, look how disgusting we can be. Like they want something that at least has some sort of aesthetic appeal to it. But I think ultimately what I think the step forward going from it is like people that like me that like anime is, well, how could we incorporate what's good about that and produce it as a Western culture? Because for me, a lot of the best anime, like they can start portraying Japanese traditionalism, like Shintoism or a lot of like traditional Japanese values, which, okay, that's great for them, but what does it really mean for, a Christian in the West?
Yeah, that's why it's difficult to say how you're going to get culture to actually portray this, because I don't want to say like make a movie or make a video game like this, because I mean that's obviously not feasible. I'd say that to start, like I mentioned before, picking something from pop culture that you're interested in and learning about it. And for a few examples on how you can do that, say if you like the movie 300, maybe if you'd like to learn about ancient Greece, there's a professor named Donald Keegan, and you can listen to his lectures on ancient
Did he
Greece.
write the book Gates of Fire?
I believe so.
Yeah, like yeah, and that's, I think that's even better, is like if you can take something you learn from pop culture or like something you're watching or playing, and you can apply that to real life, to like improving yourself. Like let's take again Nier Automata. Like there's lots and lots of swordplay. Like what's cool is there's a YouTube channel called Man at Arms Reforged, where they'll like take swords and weapons from like anime and video games, and they'll like actually forge them in like an actual like blacksmith shop, and it's really cool. And it's like I give them huge amounts of credit, because it's like they're actually making a craft. And it's like if you were like super interested in like combat, let's say in a video game or an anime that uses swords or guns, it's like, hey, what if that led you towards, hey, I want to learn how to use this? Or if the game mentions philosophers or talks about that, it's like, hey, they mentioned Hegel, why don't I go look up who Hegel was?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this entertainment doesn't even need to be historically accurate, as long as it gets you interested in investigating it for yourself. I think that
California Reactionary gave me another super chat. He said VeggieTales is the ultimate reactionary media. I'm like, certainly it's better than Rick and Morty. I mean, actually, you could argue that apart from generally being an entertaining, like for kids, a Christian show, like I think most people that grew up with VeggieTales still think like it's actually really good for what it was. But for the time, it actually did look like it pushed the medium of 3D animation forward. But sorry, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, what I was going to say was that yeah, so just pick something out of pop culture if you're someone who's been kind of disaffected, and pick something that you find interesting and explore it a bit deeper. So, or another example could be if you like the game Battlefield 1, well, there's a series on YouTube called The Great War, where they go through what happened every week in World War One, and a lot of this stuff is free also, so you don't need to be shelling out cash to be doing this, and you're not going to be funding these progressive companies too.
Yeah, you're ordering something yourself.
Yeah, the best way to fight it is to fight progressive institutions is with your wallet. So
yeah.
So, oh shoot, what was I going to say?
I think what I would say is that another thing is, one problem I think people that would have had a reactionary or traditionalist mindset. Why am I slurring my speech? I had one beer. But is this sort of temptation of, well, like thinking that it's just going to be, we're going to go back to the way things were in 1900, where it's like, no, like we have to live in the modern world. We can't pretend that the past 200 years of culture didn't happen. And it's why I'm sort of like a fan of, not just because I find it aesthetically pleasing, but like there's a musical genre called electro swing, where it's old timey like 1930s, 40s, and 50s sort of jazz era swing music, but like remixed or modernized with like techno rhythm, and it actually sounds really, really good. And it doesn't sound just like this really cheap like crap that you would find on pop music. It sounds like it's like somebody really like took elements from that era of music that they really liked, and then combined it with another thing, and they made a new genre of music that I think is quite, wouldn't say edifying, but I think is genuinely good, and probably a lot better, at least in my opinion, than the latest, piece of crap from Nicki Minaj or Kanye West.
Yeah, because I really, like I said earlier, a lot of mainstream entertainment, it's really just degrading. In fact, there was this video that Tim Pool did that he compared critic scores on Rotten Tomatoes, because like Rotten Tomatoes, it's an aggregate of what all the critics said versus user scores, and for example, Star Wars, the Last Jedi, it got like 94% from the critics, but
Mhm.
less than half of the fans liked it, and for a Rotten Tomato score, that's pretty darn low.
Oh yeah, yeah, I
Meaning
know
there's
about
just
that.
oh
I
yeah, because
finally,
there's
I finally saw it with my dad, and it's like I laughed at numerous points in the movie because I already known what would happen in that film, but I'm like I love the theory that the guy who directed it was trolling everybody by going like, I want to intentionally crash the Star Wars franchise.
yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I say that a lot of these things are breaking down is because I find what the progressive establishment right now is that they're scared, so they're purity spiraling, and it's gotten to the point where they can't really create art that's not just pure propaganda.
Yeah,
So it needs to all be way over the top. So in Star Wars, all the white males need to be like screaming their heads off. They have to be these
Laura Dern has to
cartoonish
have purple
villains.
hair.
Yeah, yeah. The female characters have to have purple hair. They have to like put the men in their place. Like it's just so like blatant their message that it just becomes like sheer propaganda.
Mhm.
And that's what tells me that their grip on culture, it's very loose, because I think they're squeezing really tightly because they realize that uh there's a chance of it slipping out of their hands, and
Mhm.
that's like
And I think
somewhere you.
I think giving us a little hope, because we need some hope. We can't be completely black pilled. So we are like, well, what's the point of trying anything? But like, the thing is, what I have noticed, what I'm beginning to notice, is that progressives must like they're at the pinnacle of their. It seems like they're about at the pinnacle of their institutional power, but they're noticing that these sort of anti-progressive movements, these explicitly anti-progressive movements, like the alt right and whatnot, like they're not going away. Like the alt right's not gonna stop anytime soon. It's gonna, regardless of it, if it becomes the dominant political ideology of the right, it's going to stick around for the next few decades. And it's like that's terrifies left. Then the fact that, yes, elections aren't everything, but you have, more and more far right parties gaining steam in European countries, and the fact that Trump got elected, regardless of what people think of him, the progressives are scared because they're starting to realize that there is a substantial amount of the population in the West that is not just not going along with their project, but is explicitly determined to stop it, and that they can't get rid of
Exactly.
them. And so they have
Yeah,
to
exactly.
increasingly just like portray them as Nazis. But the thing is, they've cried Nazi is in the modern world the most evil thing you could possibly be. And so once they keep using it and using it, and it's starting to lose its meaning, like they're trying to figure out some way to decredit people, and or to discredit like anybody that opposes them, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for them. So that's why it seems like they're going to these extreme measures, to the point where, like, Kanye West, I think there's a high chance Kanye West is just like, he's probably almost certainly not a conservative or an ardent Trump supporter. He's just probably trolling people because it's funny. But the thing is, the progressives are just going completely ballistic over it. They're
Well, yeah,
taking
because
it
they
seriously.
have to lash out at Kanye West, because uh the reason they have to lash out at him is because it's going against just their very tentative hold on power. So it's to discourage any other celebrities from possibly leaving the progressive stack. And no, I agree with you. I don't think Kanye West is like this ultra conservative guy. He probably just I mean, the things he said were pretty simple things, like, I don't hate Trump's guts. I don't hate Trump. I don't want to kill him. And then and then they pretty much lashed out at the guy.
But it's also the fact that he is one of the most famous and, like, wealthy and financially lucrative celebrities in America.
Yeah. And yeah, because they really are kind of at a point that they can't really afford to allow dissent, because once they allow that, then more and more people will eventually break off. And I think it's important not to get overly excited,
Mhm.
because we're not gonna we can't like say, oh well, Kanye West is gonna save the West, because I mean, well, Kanye West, the West. I didn't.
Kanye
Anyway,
Occidental.
oh, okay. But yeah, it's important to not get carried away, but it's a sign that their grip on power is weakening. That's what I'd say.
And you notice again, Kanye West. What is he? He's a cultural figure. He's not a. Um, it's like him. Let's say he did become just an out and out like far right conservative. He would have again. I would have said he would do more than Donald Trump ever could.
Yeah. I don't. Let's be honest. Though, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm just using it sort of as an example. The fact that like if conservative, particularly for our interest, Christians can actually make genuinely good culture, that's going to be way more detrimental to the progressives than just like, hey, we're going to keep voting Republican so they can slow down the Democrats for a couple years.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think that's what we need to work on building on. And I'd say that once you what I said before, and finding something that you find interesting, I'd say once you've done that, branch out to your other buddies that might be in the same boat as you. Like, for example, I've had many conversations with people talking about Batman's morality in the Dark Knight series, and I mean that was a good series. And but a lot of these people, like they've never thought about morality in the real world, and that I think is a real opportunity. It's that you can really engage someone on, because they clearly have these ideas of good and bad, but they've never really applied it in the real world, because they've kind of just been consumed by just the mass consumption, you know.
And I think the most dangerous part about that, before I go on, is like many people will just say, well, morality is subjective, but most people don't act like that. They'll still act. Oh, yeah. They'll essentially accept whatever is the current zeitgeist as the standard for morality. But I was going to go onto that. Like, I know this again sounds absurd, but Netflix recently, a couple of years ago, released a remake of the old '80s show Voltron about the giant robot in space. And like I've been watching it, and it's a very good show. But what I've noticed is that, as I mentioned, like with Steven Universe, is like when I have kids, like if I have a son, I would never let him watch a show like Steven Universe, because it's such a toxic show for young boys, because it shows like its main character is this horribly emasculated, loser. Whereas like Voltron, like the actual most of its cast, first off, most of its like of its 7 main characters, 5 of them are males, and it's like, yeah, they've got their own little character traits. Like one of them is the smooth ladies guy, the other one's the loner, but it's like they actually exude a much more, I would say, positive like they act like actual young men do and ought to act, like understanding like this is what my duty is, or like teamwork, or like helping each other in a much more healthy way than like, hey, we're going to defy all of traditional masculinity. Like they don't mention that once in the series. It's more just like we are. It's like it's just sort of like what's expected of them is what they learn to do, because like we have to do this to save people, and that's sort of in a lot of ways the core masculinity, or at least a healthy aspect of it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential in a lot of the messages in current culture about morality. And I mean, people, like I said, people will understand it in the movie, but they won't ever think of it in their personal lives, because we live in a society that doesn't see morality as something that's necessary. And I think that's one way you can really tap into people, because there's clearly an interest in it, but it's just never been discussed with them.
That, in the sense that I think people are increasingly, it's like they don't see culture as actually meaning anything. Like, and this is a problem I especially have with a lot of people when you try and like critique films. Like, let's say the latest Star Wars movie, where it's like, and you say, well, like these are all the problems with it, and it's like this is bad. They'll just like, the thing that just bugs me the most, and I think something that I think is really almost dangerous, is when they say like, well, shut up, it's just a movie. It's just a movie. Where it's like, okay, well, if it's just a movie, you're implying it doesn't mean anything. Well, then why did you go see it? And I got another super chat from California Reactionary. Heading out, love your channel, pray for Cali. I will. Anyways, that was nice of him. But that's the point. Like, is culture supposed to mean something or not? Because it seems like, because I'm a firm believer in the existence of high, medium, and low culture, that like, this idea of like, well, anything can be truly beautiful, or like there's no such thing as low or high art. I think there is. Like, you know, so let's take like a film like Apocalypse Now or Back to the Future. Like, you can't really compare the two. Like, Back to the Future is a really, really good low art movie. I don't think it's like, I'm not using that as an insult. It's just like, it's a pop culture movie, but it's just very, very well made, acted, and blah blah blah. Where it's like Apocalypse Now, or a high art film like what's the Russian film about the about resistance fighters that was made in the 80s?
Red Dawn.
No, that was a movie about
the movie was terrible.
No, it's a Russian film.
Ninth Company.
No, it's not even that. I can't remember, but it's some Russian film I watched in my Russian history class that's like definitely sort of high art. And it's like, you need both, but what we're getting is like these stupid little independent, like whatever, like Oscar worthy films come out, or like the little independent films are completely just progressive propaganda and Oscar bait material that all the progressives will jerk off to, and intellectually speaking, and just like virtue signal over at the Academy Awards, and everything else is just like, here's the next Marvel, DC, and Star Wars remake. So it's like everybody is only getting like pop culture. The masses are not exposed to like any meaningful high art, because they don't think it's like they don't want to watch any. It's like, oh, this little weird independent film, I don't want to watch that. I just want to watch the new Avengers movie.
Yeah, I know.
Or God forbid, the new Adam Sandler film.
Oh, I don't think anyone wants to watch that one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do agree, because you can really see at these award shows is where you really see them purity spiraling, and coincidentally, their ratings are just tanking. Every year it's lower and lower, and yeah, I don't see these so-called best pictures as very they don't really give me I don't really see what meaning they give off. Like, it's usually just either
I remember like last year, I watched that movie La La Land, which almost won Best Picture at the Oscars. I'm like, that movie was terrible. Like, its ending had like no catharsis. It was just like, yeah, actually, all the good stuff didn't actually happen. Boo.
Yeah.
Like, it was just depressing.
Yeah.
And then of course it lost to the movie about gay black people.
Well, yeah, because that one has to win, because I mean, because Trump got elected, so that one has to be the one. Mm-hmm. But what I'd say is that we'd have to start off small, because obviously we can't compete with Hollywood, at least on scale, which is why I think that a good way to start is just by just discovering some interesting portions of Western culture and Western heritage. I think that's mm-hmm. just finding those little things, and it really gives you an appreciation for an appreciation for your heritage and your culture, mm-hmm. and I think that really is what drives people to fight for these things.
And I think in a way it's also just I think a problem though is often like the idea of like forcing people into, like, you can't force people to like certain culture or entertainment. Like, it's like, I don't like rap music, and it's like, you can't, it's like, or like, you can't, I don't like Mozart, let's say. I understand that he's like one of the most influential composers in Western history, but it's like, you can't sort of make me like him, because yes, a lot of culture is subjective in terms of tastes, but it shouldn't be forced, in the sense of, it should be things that people will like, because people can like so much of different culture. People have so many different tastes, but it's like, if that you can use what people like to sort of lead them or guide them towards a more, I say, traditional understanding of the world, all the better, as opposed to just saying everybody has to listen to old classical music or Gregorian chant and dress like you're from the 19th century. It's like, no. Because that's
that's why I said, like, pick something that interests you, mm-hmm. and I think have the idea that you're not really trying to recreate the past, because you can't ever do that, but mm-hmm. what you're trying to do is create a better future, and trying to create a new culture that it takes from the traditions of the past, but it creates something. It creates something new. It creates a new.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like that's why I'm sort of hesitant to use the term reactionary, because it's like what really we want to do as in culture is like we and people of our with our values, like we are supposed to be the ones that are like the pushing. We want to be portraying ourselves as the ones pushing culture forward, or we're the ones like that are on the cutting edge of like what's new and hip, in a sense of like, not trying to be, like a mom trying to be hip with the kids, but like understanding that like we can't, like what you said, we can't just be saying we need to go back to the past, because you can't do that. And then, and in a way, it's just like it's stagnant. That's cultural stagnation. Even if we could get that, it's like, okay, so we're just going to make culture stay the way it was in 1900. Was that I can't believe that like culture could not, like architecture, art could, was completely unable to improve during the Romantic and Realist period. Like there has to be a way to get it to, something that maybe, better in a different way, but like it doesn't have to only go downhill. And that's the problem, is that it's like, is it just an inevitability that culture has to degrade? If so, what's the point? I happen to believe that, no, like people, if we can be creative enough, or if we can really think outside the box and just be and experiment culturally, people with the conservative Christian mindset, like what kind of art could they make? Because you think about that, you have that sort of, because you always need the sort of the radical liberal, in not in the political sense, but in the sense of like exploring new ideas to experiment and create new culture. But if you have that combined with a deep respect for an objective understanding of truth, goodness, and beauty, and in terms of actual like visual arts and literary and musical art, that there is objective standards, and you work on that and then create something new, I think there could be a potential for a cultural renaissance.
Yeah, I would agree. It would need to start small, but I think all cultural movements do. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's why I think like, something small, or like going to like a, from if encouraging a few people to become passionate about art or about creating things. If that could lead into, I think like some small community of like conservative Christian artists, I think that would be the next step.
Yeah.
Because then you let them support each other and get their work out there. And that sort of starts leading towards and what do you have there? Well, you started your own small institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like one thing we could probably do was suggest certain books that people could read, and then I guess have conversations on these books to encourage people to actually pick up these books and read them, and try to engage in that way. I mean, that's just an idea off the top of my head.
Like one thing that I promise this will be the last time I mention Distributus on this live stream, but
it's okay.
Like one of the things he really recommended to me, or I think it's like a lot of people like have trouble getting into Shakespeare, which is sad because he's the greatest writer in the English language, possibly the greatest writer who ever lived. But like people think that you can only like, from my experience with Shakespeare, is something that's meant to be seen as a play or a film, not just read as a book. Like they're written as plays. And that's why, like, I saw the movie Titus Andronicus with Anthony Hopkins. I'm like, this movie is amazing because it like takes this story that's supposed to be set in the ancient Roman world, but like, it's like they'll have like everybody sort of like the senators, the Roman senators, who have like suits and ties, and like they're like dressed in this like weird 20s outfits mixed with like ancient Roman togas, and like they're like the new emperor is speaking at a microphone for a radio, and the radio says like SPQR on it, and it's like that's creative, but it's also building on top of something. It's like people can connect a little more because there's modern aspects to it, but it's like it's that visual medium of film that is in a way can preserve traditional culture that way. And I think if people can understand, just using Shakespeare as an example, him as something that's a living heritage as opposed to this dusty old book written by an old white guy 500 years ago, Like, and that's the thing, is culture is something that's supposed to be alive, not, this thing you dust off every once in a while to show, hey, look how, cultured I am.
Yeah, I think one thing that people should understand is that a lot of these things, so Shakespeare, Tolstoy, this is who you are. It's the story of you.
Mm-hmm.
Because these things existed in your world, they were written about your world, and if it was possible of that back then, I think you definitely could create something of beauty today.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, we have that adversity of the entirety of culture seems to be completely stagnating right now, where it's like it seems like if anybody, all it'll take is like somebody to create something new. And it's, I mean, again, to get a little hope is that conservatives or reactionaries are probably going to be one of the few people that could do something like that, like be one of those radical experimental artists that's going to create something actually, moving and good in a new culture. I think we can start wrapping up now. I think, how long have we been on? About an hour?
About an hour.
Okay, yeah, I think we can start wrapping up. We can go for a little longer. So, what else? Anything like else regarding creating new culture? Because I think this has been a good conversation so far.
Well, what I'll say is that yeah, just to break out of mainstream culture, just find something that find alternatives. So look on YouTube or on just maybe you can start researching something on Wikipedia. Just find things that interest you. Um, get good at them. Share them with others,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully eventually create and find something that you're passionate about. And
Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's like, yeah, I think that could be useful, or in the way of like, even if some like you yourself aren't, not you specifically, but people watching, even if you yourself aren't like inclined to be an artist or a writer or a poet or something like that, it's like the people that you share it with could be. So it's like, if we can start by learning our own, because this is what great artists did. Like, they didn't start by just saying, I'm going to make whatever I want completely from scratch. It's like, no, like writers and artists, like, you learn about, how the art developed through centuries. You start and then you can go on. And it's like, relearning like our own cultural identity as Westerners would be very helpful, because then people that would want to create new art, they would have that inspiration and that foundation, so they can create something that's not just something horribly ugly and has no connection to our Western heritage.
yes, and I think that connecting people to that's what gets them to care about the world as a whole. Because why is it that they don't care that they defaced the museum in my city? Because I mean, no one sees any connection to this building that was built 100
because,
years ago.
because it's like, it's not just like, okay, this is something from hundreds of years ago that I'm reading about, and it's not just like, that's the first step. The next step is like, you know uh, having aspects of history, or like things that you could connect with from history that are here today. But it's also like, I think what the final step that could really be taken, that would really start shaking things up, is continuing on that culture. Like, let's take like okay, church, like let's say church music. Okay, you go from the early, you start being inspired by the early greats. Let's say you are musically inclined, you do that, then you practice that music now, and then like, if you're inspired to create your own church music inspired by that, that's I think that's where it starts. And then going forward is figuring out a way to create a community of these artists. But yeah.
Yes, and
So
when we say tradition, it's not just like worshiping something that happened in the past. What it is you want something from the past that you can bring to the present, that you can pass on to the future. That's tradition is an idea of something that's continuous.
I've heard a quote where it's like, tradition is the spreading of fire, not the worship of ashes.
Yeah, exactly.
So any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Nope. I just like to say that yeah, if you're fed up with modern culture, if you think that it's either stale, they don't take enough risks, or that you're sick of progressive propaganda being pumped your way, there are alternatives. Seek them out.
And be
introduce
the
your friends.
alternative if you can be so
And yeah,
bold.
maybe so that you can be the
Well,
alternative.
thank you so much for coming on. I've linked your channel in the description so people can check out your channel. Thank you for coming on, Dever. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next.